All right, guys, it seems like enough of us are trickling in. So let's get started. Thank you for coming to tonight's presentation. So for tonight's presentation, we're going to do a little overview, just a little recap from last time, just because a few people had joined the challenge after, or a few people have questions. So we just want to make sure everyone's super clear on, Whole 30 and what the parameters are and what we're doing. Then we're going to go more into the inflammation aspects of Whole 30 and understanding the immune system in relation to these various foods, just a general overview. And then we're going to end with more of a Q&A. We didn't want to put together a whole conglomerate of slides because we're also getting everybody together as a whole, but we also wanted to keep time conscious for you guys so that we can have more of a discussion if anyone's having questions or just want to bring up different topics about maybe going through like the sugar withdrawals, for example. So without further ado, we'll get started tonight. Of course, any questions you can always raise the hand icon, put it in the chat, and of course we're going to have a whole Q&A section. So tonight's presentation will be recorded though, just so everyone knows. So if anyone has to pop off early or if they want to go back and look at something, it will be recorded and sent out as soon as the YouTube processes it. Sorry. So the recording for the first session, I'm already seeing a question in the chat. That it was sent out via email and I believe pasted in the module, but I'll make sure it's there. And I can also send the recording for the first session with the recording for this section. So we can have it in the original email, we'll have it in the module, and then we'll send it out in the email that this recording goes out to. So there's multiple ways to access it. So today we made the title Preparation for Success because we're all still kind of in that getting used to this Whole 30 phase. So if this wants to, now my computer wants to freeze on me. There we go. Okay, so just a little housekeeping. Of course, you guys all saw the Instagram post, but this just has the next couple presentations on it. We'll see this again later on. So we're going to have the week off next week, and then we're going to have an overcoming obstacles presentation. However, as you guys always know, you can always email us, call us, message us. That's never a problem. Or most importantly, put it in the GroupMe, because if someone has a question, you're likely not alone. And then putting in the GroupMe, unless it's private or medical related, totally understand. But putting in the group is good because then it might help someone else who has the same question. So of course, what is Whole 30, right? It was made by Melissa Hartwig and Dallas Hartwig. There is a podcast here and a podcast on the module one, just to go through if you're out for a walk, just to listen to that. It's really good to hear about the founders and about the diet as a whole and the evolution of that. Because if you look up different things online, it has changed over time. So sometimes there's some conflicting information there. So that's where you can learn more about the evolution of it. We call it Whole 30 because it's a 30-day elimination, and it's about 10 days on the low end of the reintroduction phase, of course. So the guided program is to help you with the 30-day elimination, and then our last presentation will not just celebrate ourselves and celebrate going the 30 days, but also we'll go over that reintroduction piece too. There's lots of tough love, and I usually don't like the word cheating, but if we do or have any bouts, it's good to go back to day one, because technically 30 days, that's one of the critiques of the program. It's actually a short amount of time if you're truly targeting inflammation to do an elimination. It could be anywhere from 30 to 90 days. So you can go on going with it, but definitely confer with Christina and I if you're questioning that, and if that's okay with your needs. And of course, we have the Whole 30 book. Christina placed it at the front desk at Elevation. So if you don't have it at home, no sweat. You can always look at it at the front desk. Of course, we provide recipes each week, and the Whole 30, getting started, starter kit with a ton of recipes. But just in case you want to, thumb through the book, look at some new information or recipes, that's there for you. So the quote unquote rules are what's temporarily avoided, essentially. Of course, we're cutting out not necessarily sugar, but all added sugars, right? So we're reading the label for added sugars. If it says sugar on the label, like fruit has sugar, naturally occurring sugar is fine, but added sugars like honey or, agave, table sugar, maltose, if you see that in the ingredients, etc., anything that ends in OSE. Alcohol we're cutting out, of course, because there's really no benefits to alcohol. Recent research has shown, yes, there's a stress relief benefit for some, but there's other stress relievers. Grains we're cutting out because they can be inflammatory for some. Same with legumes, dairy, carrageenan, and sulfates, which are just processed ingredients. Carrageenan is an emulsifier in the GI tract that can leaky gut. Baked goods, of course, if it's a homemade option that's Whole30, like the blueberry pie concept, it's more like the processed baked goods or any baked goods containing the ingredients. And then the concept is to not step on the scale between starting the program and ending the program. I don't know why my slides are being delayed. Okay. The fine print, of course, certain legumes are accepted, right? Like green beans and peas, that includes like the ones you're seeing here, like the sugar snap peas, snow peas, for example. Iodized salt, even though it has some sugar in it, is actually okay. Fruit juice is used for flavoring. You just really want to aim for 100% fruit juice. I love tart cherry juice, or like the Palm brand that you see below, blueberry pomegranate mixed juice, because I'll add that to my smoothie if I need like a little bit of something sweet in there. And I'm getting a ton of antioxidants, which helps my muscles recover from a hard workout. The coconut aminos is a great healthy swap for soy sauce, because soy sauce contains, of course, gluten and soy, which we're trying to avoid. Specific foods that fall under the pancake rule, ignore that completely. Vinegar is actually okay in this diet, and botanical extracts are okay as well. Whole30 incorporates lots of meat, right? If we're more carnivorous, right? So for vegans, vegetarians, you guys are able to get away with having unprocessed soy, like a organic tofu or non-GMO tofu, soybeans, edamame, for example. However, those who are eating meat need to stay away from the soy and the beans. So those who are vegan, vegetarian need to go towards the beans if they'd like as well, because then they would have no significant real source of protein in their diet without that. Natural fats, of course, EVO stands for extra virgin olive oil, olives, nuts, seeds, avocados, eat plenty of it. Herbs and spices are extremely anti-inflammatory. Salt's okay to an extent, right, within your personal needs, especially depending on if we're hypertensive or not, or have any altered kidney functioning. And we want to eat foods with minimal ingredients, hence the name Whole30 emphasizes whole foods. Every time I press resume, it's freezing on me. Sulfates, we're going to look for ingredients that contain, sulfur dioxide, potassium bisulfate. You guys see the list here. It's often in a lot of the foods you're already excluding anyway, like baked goods, or certain processed jams, for example. Not all dried fruit or trail mix has it. So again, reading the label is super important. Same with guacamole, just looking out for those ingredients. Carrageenan, same concept, just make sure you're reading the labels just to avoid carrageenan. But again, it's going to be in more processed foods, which are typically cut out during this diet. If you don't have a multivitamin, this is a good general multi if you want to make sure you're just covering all bases just in case, to make sure you're getting all nutrients that you need. You can have a balanced diet while on Whole30. However, some people, if there's certain other nutritional inadequacies in their diet, or maybe certain food preferences that are keeping them away from, eating a robust amount of vegetables or proteins, for example, that we might not be getting enough like B vitamins, for example, if we're not eating a lot of our proteins. So a multivitamin is good, and this does have B's in it. What is inflammation? So this is where I just did a general recap of slides that most of you have already seen, but this is more of like a newer slide. So we hear this term inflammation all the time, but what exactly is it? So it's a vital part of our body's immune system. So say I have a cut, like I fell and I scraped my knee, right? My knee is going to start to get red, puffy, warm, inflamed, right? It's because that wound is now causing a whole cascade of igniting my immune system to want to heal and repair that damaged tissue. Macrophages and different immune cell mediators are traveling to that site. So it's getting more warm and puffy. It's to help defend against, of course, like foreign invaders, viruses, bacteria from getting in. So that's more acute inflammation, which we'll get to. So it's a naturally occurring process. Inflammation's not all bad, right? Inflammation helps our body to heal. However, there's different types of inflammation. So if it's a process that goes on too long, it can be problematic. And we would call that chronic inflammation. Or typically systemic illnesses breed chronic inflammation, like cancer, diabetes, for example, heart disease, rheumatoid arthritis. So what's the difference? Acute is typically like under a month, under 3 months. Chronic is more so 3 months or greater. So acute can usually be a higher inflammatory response overall, but over a shorter amount of time. So we're seeing, like, say, I twisted my ankle, I'm going to have a lot of swelling and puffiness and heat and pain during that short duration of time. Or if I have a sore throat. Chronic inflammation can be a little more insidious for people. So it's persistent, it's low grade, but it's for a long time. And that inflammation, when those immune cells are traveling to that site over and over and over again, it can cause damage to the tissues. Poor diet can bring this on if we're not getting enough and nutrients in our diet. Trauma, stress, depression are also, depression is an inflammatory condition, believe it or not. Other inflammatory chronic conditions include heart disease, diabetes, cancer, RA, arthritis. Anything that ends in itis means inflammation. So, for example, when it comes to heart disease, there's a buildup of plaque in the arteries, and that plaque causes immune cells to be going to the site to, clear the wound or clear like the scraping of the sugar. If the sugar is high in the bloodstream and scraping at the blood vessels and causing damage, it's going to cause the immune cells to go and make almost like a scab. That scab becomes hardened and puffy, and immune cells are continuously going to the site. And that's where you can see damage in the form of free radical damage. Next is going through innate versus adaptive immunity, right? So innate is like your first line of defense. So it's more like the good police officer cells circulating the bloodstream, like the white blood cells noticing, bacteria or viral infection, for example. Some white blood cells include neutrophils or macrophages. The response is non-targeted, right? They're just out on patrol. There's no memory of those past germs. However, say I took in a virus like COVID, right? Say I had COVID. Now my innate, the first time I have it, and if I say I didn't get a shot or anything like that, now my innate immune system is taking over to now recognize that virus and then build up antibodies to defend me from that virus should that come into my body again, right? So now it's like a learned offender, right? So the antibodies remember, and then they hold grudges, is like how we like to phrase it, and they build up cells like killer T cells to help fight it in response to it. It's a second layer germ defense, essentially. So white blood cells are still involved, but different kinds, B and T cells, they create antibodies for these repeat offenders. So here you can just see I have some examples of different adaptive immune system cells, for example. Wants to go? Here we go. So why does this matter for us, right? So sometimes in the case of leaky gut, or the more professional term is increased gut permeability, we see the mucosal linings in the intestine start to erode, and then we start to see the tight junctions, or zonulin gaps, you call it, or pores, start to gradually open up in the gut. And when those pores start to open up, whether there's gut dysbiosis going on, which means just, too much bad bugs, not enough good bugs, or we're eating foods that just don't sit well with our body, it can cause that gut to become quote unquote leaky, or those pores become wider and wider and wider. When that happens, pathogens, food products that aren't meant in that large of a molecule to pass through that gut lining into the bloodstream start passing through. Uh-oh. What does that mean? That's where you could see a whole slew of things affect the body, especially depending on what that pathogen is, your body's own unique response to that. So, some medical conditions where sensitivities can play a primary and secondary role, meaning food sensitivities, include all the following here. So, you can see gastrointestinal issues, especially when you start seeing diagnoses of like IBS, for example, endocrine issues like obesity, of course, if there's different hormone imbalances, leptin, ghrelin, neurological issues. Our gut and our brain are connected, especially through our vagus nerve. And when things are not going right in the gut, you also often can see like depression, insomnia, migraines, even anxiety has been linked as well, PCOS. So there's food allergies, which is more so the person's antibodies reacting to a food, right? There's food sensitivities, which can be more so I eat this food and I get this discomfort, whether it's, bloating, gas, diarrhea, mood swings, migraines, etc. And then there's an inflammatory reaction, right? So if the food allergy, it's more, I can go into anaphylaxis, I need an EpiPen or I need Benadryl to reduce this, where food sensitivity, often it's not going to lead to, not often, it does not lead to anaphylaxis, right? The autoimmune piece is that awkward in between, that it's the body's immune system mounting a different kind of response, like a cytokine response to that food, for example, which we'll get into what a cytokine is and all of that down the road. But there's 3 different classifications. So that's why some people can have symptoms from a food and then they go to the allergist or the rheumatologist or the derm and try to get diagnosed with an allergy and nothing comes up and they're all clear. But meanwhile, how come every time I eat dairy, then my stomach is hurting, I have to go to the bathroom, my head hurts, my skin crawls, and that meaning like a rash or something? What's going on there? So there's different tests that can be looked at. However, one of the best things to do is something like this. It's affordable, it's evidence-based, that you could do an elimination diet, cut out these common culprits, dairy, gluten, soy, for example, and add them back in one at a time after already cutting them out for 30 days to start to figure out, okay, what is causing these symptoms for me? It's all a new frontier in GI. I think a lot of it is we're living in an environment that our body is not adapted to, meaning in America, we live to work. We don't, no, sorry. Yeah, we live to work versus in Ireland, they work to live. Wait, did I say that right? Work to live to work. And meanwhile, we're all very stressed, right? So stress can impact our gut health for sure. But also we're eating processed foods that, the body only in the past, 50 or so years has started to take in, where like our bodies take a lot longer amount of time to evolve, and we're not taking in the nutrients that we could have been taking in if we're eating more whole foods from the earth. Next is making connections. So chronic inflammation impacts our weight status. It can cause us to hold fluid, it impacts our mental health, our gut health, all linked to inflammation. Most of our common diseases that we pass away from here in the States are from chronic inflammatory conditions, diabetes, heart disease, cancer, for example. We want to try to improve obesity, right? By increasing nutritional quality and decreasing calories for sure. But what happens when that doesn't work, right? I've cut my calories, I'm eating enough protein, I'm eating enough carbs, I'm eating enough fats, I'm sleeping well, I'm trying to manage my stress to the best of my abilities, I'm getting my nutrients in. Why isn't it working? There could be low grade inflammation going on from different food sensitivities, for example. Of course, we want to try to increase the foods that have antioxidants that help to feed and nourish our gut, like fruits and vegetables, right? Fiber is, we don't digest fiber. The bugs in our gut do. So we have to feed them and keep them happy. If we're starving them out and then we're only feeding the bad bugs like red meat and I should say processed feedlot, red meat and sugar and refined carbs, then we're just promoting dysbiosis of, we're feeding the bad bugs and then they're just going to thrive and keep growing. And then we're starving out the good bugs, which that's how the integrity of the gut can start to erode. So we want to try to increase different probiotics in our diet. Probiotics can be from I love the pickled gingered carrots from Sang Lee. Same with pickled onions are great if they don't cause any issues for us to digest. Onions can be a little hard for some people. Kimchi is also a great probiotic. Exercise temporarily increases inflammation, right when we're working out, right when we're done working out, but overall long-term is anti-inflammatory. Helps us also, my exercise is also my mental health. When I exercise, I'm at my best. Spend quality time with family, right? Keeps our stress low, keep our cortisol low. And of course, getting adequate sleep so that our body can repair. If we're not sleeping, we're not repairing. And then we're asking our body to run our engine on empty. And of course, we're going to run into issues if we're running on empty. So next is Mediterranean diet, and it's an anti-inflammatory diet. So often it gets used as a synonym term. That anti-inflammatory diet is an overall classification of a couple diets, and the Mediterranean diet falls in there as an anti-inflammatory diet. So just for long-term planning, it's good to know that that's a great diet to transition towards if you need something with structure post Whole30. So Whole30, we're trying to promote fruits and vegetables, just like the Mediterranean diet. We're trying to promote MUFA, just stands for monounsaturated fatty acids, which you find in olive oil or feta cheese, for example, avocados, nuts, seeds, and omega-3s. So those are what you call your anti-inflammatory fats. Omega-3s, yes, you can get them from chia seeds, Brussels sprouts, walnuts, to name some plant-based options. Marine-based options tend to be better depending on your personalized genetic status. And you get those from fatty fish like salmon, tuna, herring, sardines. The smaller mouth fish are better because they tend to pick up less toxins like mercury in the ocean. So sardines and anchovies. Think in Sicily, they eat a lot of anchovies. It's of course a very Mediterranean diet. Fibrous whole grains, if they agree with your stomach. They're Mediterranean, but we don't have to have grains in our diet to have a healthy, balanced diet. Red wine in moderation. I'm very anti-alcohol. I know I sound like a prude, but I just don't see a benefit from it. Of course, from time to time, sure. But for what it gives, there's nothing that alcohol gives us that we can't get from something else. That's my personal thoughts. And it's more likely to do damage to the body than help the body. That's just how I see it. Someone can disagree, but that's how I see it. Avoiding inflammatory foods. So we want to avoid feedlot red meat. That's high in inflammatory saturated fats. Sugar, of course, very inflammatory, and triggers discovered during Whole30. So if you find whole grains bother your stomach, beans bother your stomach, dairy, that could be a potential trigger for inflammation and could be trialed to be avoided, and see how you feel. So when we reduce our inflammation, we help our gut to heal, right? It can also do a whole slew of good things for our body, like all these options that you see here around the image of reducing risk for Alzheimer's disease, reduce risk for Parkinson's, help prevent or prevent further development of heart disease, to name a few examples. But most conditions we're trying to starve off are inflammatory conditions. Let's see. Okay, so let's go more into food allergies, right? Food sensitivities. So non-allergic, right? So it's not an IgE antibody, right? Some food sensitivities are measured with IgG, however. Non-celiac inflammatory reactions. So someone can have that gluten sensitivity, for example, and test negative for celiac disease. So that's important to be aware of. There is no test for gluten sensitivity. And there is a test for dairy sensitivity, but it works to an extent. It's called a hydrogen breath test. So that's one of the only food intolerances that there's actually a test you can really ask your GI for. For the most part, you can do a KMBO IgG antibody test that we have here at Functional. And we also offer MRT testing. However, those tests can get really pricey. And I also find they can be a little invasive, not in a bad way, but an elimination diet is cost effective and it's the least invasive method. And doing an elimination diet like Whole30 also encapsulates more of a synergistic balance of good things on the diet, because we're not just focusing on what to cut out, we're focusing on, all the good foods to add in too, and building community. So there's multiple mechanisms that can affect food sensitivities, and I'll show you that in the next few slides. So that's what makes them really tricky to diagnose. They're governed by either your innate or your adaptive immune pathways. They are important source of inflammation in chronic conditions. So for some, managing food sensitivities and reducing inflammation from those food sensitivities could impact maybe someone's blood sugars, right? Their blood sugars are a barometer of stress on the body. So if we're eating a lot of like dairy and gluten and say soy, and meanwhile it's something that we're super sensitive to, it can be adding stress to the body, elevating blood sugars, just an example situation. It is clinically very challenging to diagnose, even as a dietitian doing this for a while. It's tricky just because there are so many pathways and there's so many foods in our diet and so many ingredients in our diet, and ruling certain things out can be hard. So that's why, Whole30 is it's a difficult diet. We're cutting out a lot of things, but then adding them back in. Food sensitivities versus allergies, right? We're going through food sensitivities are, not going to bring us more into anaphylaxis. Typically, food allergies develop when we're younger. Food sensitivities can develop throughout your lifespan and can happen at any age. And some broader group of people are affected by food sensitivities than are affected by food allergies. A food allergy, you'll probably see you will see a reaction within about 2 hours if you have eaten an allergen at a high enough dose, depending on your individual reaction status to different foods. And also, it's important to note with a food allergy, your reaction can be different every time. So when I was working with the students at Stony Brook University to help manage their food allergies, especially as freshmen, living on campus, eating, food from the dining halls, and if they have, 7 different food allergies, at least we would know if they had something, it would happen within 2 hours, and they have to keep, an EpiPen on hand, Benadryl on hand, God forbid, and we have to have a plan for them. Where food sensitivities, they're tricky because they're not so quick, they're not so immediate, right? So it's a delayed reaction, can be up to 72 hours. I eat a lot of different foods in 72 hours to have to try to, figure that out. So that's part of what makes it hard. Food takes about 3 to 4 hours just to leave the stomach. Signs can be widespread, like you guys saw, the different conditions: bloating, joint pain, IBS, tiredness, eczema, just to name a few. However, they're not deadly short term, right? And food allergies can be deadly and life-threatening. So the common food allergens you could see, we used to call them the big 8, but actually now it's the big 9. They added sesame to the mix. So there's this common grouping there, as well as the common food sensitivities you'll see here on the left-hand side: wheat, gluten, milk, dairy, corn, sugar, eggs, right, or other common food sensitivities. There's a whole slew. Everyone's different though. Someone could have a food sensitivity to almonds. I've seen that a lot. I don't know why it's skipping the wrong, skipped like a couple of slides ahead on me. There we go. Okay. So next, it's going to get a little sciencey. I promise we'll only stay on this slide for a short bit. So typically there's a triggering mechanism that goes off, like we eat a food and a food antigen or immune complex is released in response to that food. So like IgG antibody, IgM antibody, lectins, just to name. And then that causes a mediated cascade of effect where you'll see different cells like white blood cells released. Based on these white blood cells here in the middle box, there's a mediated release of either cytokines, leukotrienes, histamines, prostaglandins, just to name a few. Cytokines are inflammatory molecules. Inflammatory molecules you can typically measure in the blood, like interleukin-6, TNF alpha are common ones. This is what the MRT LEAP test looks at. And then those mediated release molecules cause the damage or cascaded effect. So if I'm not, treating my body kindly, especially around the time of my cycle, I notice I create a lot of prostaglandins. Those prostaglandins give me intense migraines. So that's just an example of, if I'm eating, lots of sugar and I'm super stressed and I'm not sleeping well, and my period lets me know, and I get a lot of prostaglandins because of that. That's just an example. So the polyphysiological effects can be inflammation, like we're talking about, tissue damage from that inflammation, right? If those immune cells are, traveling to that site, think of it like an ambulance, a fire truck, driving all, say pulled over on the side of the road and it's, staying there a while, doing work there a while, maybe breaking down the cement or something like that. It's kind of like an analogy to think of, that it's doing damage to the surrounding tissue because of it. You see traffic building up on the road, right? That tissue damage, of course, especially in the gut, can erode that gut permeability, cause those zonulin gaps to widen or create bigger pores in the gut and allow those pathogens to pass through into the bloodstream, causing further inflammation, damage. It's our highway. So then they can get all in the body in certain places that cause damage, which is where you could be seeing your symptoms. Edema. So when someone's inflamed, they tend to be puffy, right? We've all can picture, when alcoholics have very, puffy cheeks and like right under their eyes, they're very red. That's someone who's chronically inflamed, just when you're looking at someone visibly. Or someone's face is just chronically very red. They've got a lot of acne. They're very puffy. That can also be a visible sign of inflammation. But there's a whole slew of examples. Common features of diet-induced inflammation. We went through this in just a different way in that slide. But what's hard about looking at these sensitivities, for example, is the delayed symptom manifestation. It can be dose dependent for some people, meaning that, maybe lactose really doesn't bother me. Dairy doesn't really bother me if it's in a small dose, like say Greek yogurt, cottage cheese has a lot less dairy in it. I mean, a lot less lactose in it. Or especially if it's like grass fed and there's more, better fats in it, versus if I'm having like ice cream or a glass of milk, which has a lot more of that lactose, which I might be sensitive to. So it can be dose dependent for some people. There breakdown of oral tolerance mechanisms for some. Though, like we've been saying, there's so many foods, so many chemicals in our food system, not just counting our, beauty regimens, our cleaning regimens, and even some anti-inflammatory foods. I was just talking with a patient earlier today. She's like, what's the deal with eggs? She goes, I thought eggs were good. And now I'm hearing and seeing things online that eggs are the devil in terms of heart disease. I mean, not heart disease. Yes, heart disease, there's always that question with eggs too. But with regard to inflammation, and it's also one of those foods. It's not cut out in Whole30 because it's not as common as the other foods that we're cutting out, which are the typically most common that we see. However, eggs can also be in that family that could trigger someone, for example. Non-celiac gluten intolerance, right? Oh, sorry, I'm having a little issue with the slides tonight, guys, and I'm moving around the bar that everyone's stuff shows up on. And just so I could see the slides, because there's just a lot on the screen. So the immunological complexities of gluten sensitivity is that you can't just do, a biopsy like you can with celiac disease, or measure the antibodies in the blood. For some, they won't test positive, right? However, they eat gluten and they feel really sick, and then they feel really confused when GI or we tell someone, hey, your celiac test came back negative. Gluten sensitivity is actually 6 to 8 times more prevalent than celiac disease. And what's, with a allergic reaction, there's a common cluster of symptoms where, like we've been going over tonight, these symptoms could be very broad when it comes to food sensitivities: mood swings, migraines, eczema, skin redness, rash, bloating, gas, constipation, water retention, just to name a very small few. Also, you see a lot of fatigue because the body is stressed, getting that sensitivity out of the body. Often, like if you're eating a food and like your heart, like you eat that food and like your heart rate's racing and you feel really sick, or you like want to fall asleep right after you eat that food, it's typically, a sign it might not be agreeing with us. Non-celiac gluten intolerance or gluten sensitivity activates the innate immune system, historically neglected in diet-induced inflammation research. So GI is having a new frontier now because there's so many people complaining of GI issues. And I think the root of it is often, mental health in this country, stress management, and also we're just eating a diet that we are not evolved to eat yet. And there's just so many chemicals in our system that our liver has to detoxify. So I think by, now we take the steps to focus on prevention, eating a healthy anti-inflammatory diet, looking at the chemicals that we're around on a day-to-day basis so that we can help our body to be at our best self. So there is control there. And if you ever have questions about different ingredients or different alternatives, that's what we're here for. That's what, one-on-one counseling is for, to help you guys with your own unique needs and to solve this puzzle, because doing it on our own ain't easy. And that's why we're here as a group. And that's why we're doing this as a group, because it's also just hard to cut things out of the diet. And it's really nice to know that there's solace in being a part of a team. And I loved in the group chat earlier, like we were talking about, fatigue from cutting out the sugar. And we're all there to, to lean on each other, help each other, and give, guidance. So the key point from the gluten sensitivity is understanding and identifying specific food triggers, including gluten or, the foods we're cutting out until 30. And it's crucial in designing an effective plan to reduce inflammation, maximize clinical benefits, and most importantly, lead our happiest, healthiest life, that we're not dealing with these painful symptoms. This is all, what I've been kind of already going through and saying in the previous slide, but these are just great images to take a peek at if you got questions. But it's showing you essentially the comparison between celiac disease and non-celiac gluten intolerance, as well as, how the innate immune system and the adaptive immune system work and create a cascade of effects in the body that can go affecting us when we have these different foods in our body. So I just put a little time audit in here. If some of us are feeling that we don't have a lot of time in our schedule to meal plan or exercise or whatnot, it's something I like to do for myself. I often I'll do this once every couple of months, just to be like, what time do I actually have in my week available? So you start with 168 hours because that's how much is in a week. You subtract, if you think 8 hours for sleep, you subtract 56 hours. All right, I got 112 hours to myself. Then, of course, work. Everyone always works a little more than their typical 40. This is America. So we say, say 50 hours or whatever's realistic for you. Subtract that from that 112. Look at your commute, look at your grocery shopping, look at your meal prep, look at your errands, family, friends, exercise, self-care, other things you have in your day, and you could see how much time you truly have left in your week. After doing it this way, it was 9 hours. That's awesome. I often like to look at making a to-do list for myself and then putting that into my calendar and planning realistically on the hour what I have time for, and then giving myself grace to say, okay, if I get to it, I get to it. If I don't, I don't. Things come up all the time. But I think if I make a prioritized to-do list, including like the meal prep, looking for certain brands or, asking us, and then plugging that into our day-to-day routine, it can be helpful for managing our time and keeping on a schedule. I'm not seeing a lot of issues with time management though, so it's really good. Most importantly, I wanted to bring this slide in to bring us to our Q&A, which is anyone having like any barriers, any wins, anything that we want to kind of share with the group, or just common questions? Let's see.
Someone was asking in our chat, so I figured we could bring it up here, about how to get in extra protein. So I had mentioned like the chia and the hemp seeds. Those are a great source of protein to add. Well, not a great source, but a good source. Like 3 tablespoons is 10 grams of protein. So even if you did a tablespoon and a half, you're getting about 5 grams of protein right there from those foods, and they're anti-inflammatory. Hard-boiled eggs as a snack, I thought would be a great idea. Even just upping your protein portion size in the meal. If you're having a piece of chicken, maybe add in an extra half a piece, and that's going to up your protein very easily. I don't know if you had any other ideas.
Agree. That's usually my cover is like the thoughts to cover is exactly that. Or of course we have those only what you need protein drinks too, that if you want to sip them in between meals, those are Whole30 compliant. And of course, like using your snacks as a way to capitalize, like Christina said, hard-boiled eggs, the grass-fed beef jerky sticks by Chomps. Shrimp cocktail is a sneaky lean protein source. For our vegans, vegetarians, the dried edamame can be a great tool. For those who are more carnivorous, we cannot have the edamame though. I just want to make sure that's clear. But yeah, is anybody running into stuff like this? Because that's what we're here for tonight. Honestly, I want to just make sure, and Christina wants to make sure all bases are covered. Like if you have a brand you're looking for, a snack you're looking for, dealing with some kind of symptom, like I'm feeling tired, that's what we're here for tonight. Not a bad thing. Not a bad thing. Anybody want to share different wins though? It's good that we're not running into barriers. I'm happy about that. But anyone want to share different wins? Like, hey, like for me, I thought cutting out the sugar was going to be a lot harder. And I'm like, wow, okay, we've got swaps. I'm doing good. I'm happy. The blueberry pie is awesome. Oh, perfect, guys. Oh, thank you. Thanks, Mara. All right, guys. Well, we're here in the group chat. Oh, we're getting some messages coming in. Follow the Whole30 Instagram, and it is useful for ideas. Absolutely, Malexa. I agree. I think the Whole30 website, their Instagram is really great as well. It's a great tool just in general for even after Whole30, just for different recipes that you might want to incorporate or snacks. Plantains, yeah, they're not, it's just oil and like a plantain. So I'm thinking fried plantains, excuse me, regular plantains. Yeah, those are Whole30, and that's a great way to get a healthy starch in your diet. That's totally okay. Great question. Davida, you made your own balsamic dressing and gave up honey in your tea. Hey, great job. I know I think you were was it you who was mentioning the balsamic earlier? I think a few days ago, someone had asked for Primal Kitchen brand or making their own. So I think that was you. So way to go. Let's see what else is in here. Plantains.
Bill says he's tired and hungry all the time.
No. Yeah. All right. So the question for Bill is, are we eating enough? Right? Because often if we're cutting things out of our diet and if we're not replacing it, like, so I see this often with, like, none of us here are really doing this, but it's just a good example. Say someone's drinking soda, right? And then they cut that out of their diet. It was contributing X amount of calories to their diet, that if they're not, replacing that with like a protein, a vegetable, a healthy fat, that could be the trigger. But also feeling tired could just be the withdrawal too from cutting out those different ingredients. So just checking in. If you want us to give a look at what you're eating to make sure it's enough and it's nourishing enough for you, we can always do that too.
Yeah, you can always email us like just a 24-hour recall with like portion sizes of what you're eating. Anyone can, and we can just give it a look. But also, I think it's very common. I've mentioned, I've done this a couple times, and cutting out the sugar is a big one. It works like it is addictive, and I feel like it's similar to like caffeine. When you cut it out, you feel like a little crappy for a little bit. So it could be your body just adjusting. Where are we at? We're like 5 days in. So
that
4 or 5 days in. So you could also give it a little more time. Like I feel like by next week we should start to be feeling a little more energized.
I totally agree. Absolutely.
And if not, then you really need to look and make sure you're eating enough.
Mm-hmm. Anybody having issues though, like not even issues, any wins, like anybody feeling unexpectedly better yet? It's not common for this phase, but just anybody has, hey, I feel more energized. I've already noticed, my digestion feels better, my skin, or my mood, my fatigue.
Someone had mentioned to me that they are feeling less gassy with dairy, without
That
the dairy, so that's positive.
absolutely, absolutely. And if you haven't had a chance to yet, look at that symptom questionnaire, because it's still that early phase. That if you haven't filled that out yet, definitely fill that out, because we're going to want to fill that out again at the end, just to see, hey, is there a comparison in some of the things we were feeling? Because sometimes, and this is a good thing that happens, some people just start to feel so much better that they forgot about how bad they felt. All right, guys. Well, most importantly, thank you guys for sitting in tonight. We have our next meeting on the 20th, same time, 7 o'clock, and it's going to be the same format. We'll also record the presentation coming up on the 20th and the 27th, so you can always go back and refer. And in the meantime, post in the group me, post recipes, post what you're making, post questions, post wins, and keep building up the team. And thank you for your time tonight, guys.
Thank you, everyone.